You know, he's, I don't know, I was just in a short time that I've been able to talk to him personally, just really touched by his ministry, his spirit. This guy is a humble man, yet God's imbued him with some real wisdom that I was really, I could really discern and receive. Westley is the director of Todd Ridley School of Ministry. Testimony here, it says at age 19, Jesus appeared to him, commissioned him into ministry. Maybe you'll share a little bit about that too, brother. Today, he ministers in conferences, crusades, revivals worldwide, operating in the prophetic, and revelatory, and glory realms, where miracles, signs, and wonders manifest. And brother, without any more to do, come on up and be with us, and let's give a hand to Brother Westley. Roderick. Hallelujah. God bless you, my brother. Thank you for coming and being with us.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm on a leash.
Not necessarily.
We'll
You can take that
untie
thing
you.
off of there.
There we go.
Untie you.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll lower it.
Okay.
Cause
Need this?
I'll get all relaxed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm also pretty loud as it is. So, well, one, I want to thank you guys so much for having me here with you. It's been a long time since I've spoken at a businessman's fellowship, and in many ways, it's areas like this and groups like you guys that come together and allow guys like me to come in. But you know, I remember one of my first times ever coming to a businessman's fellowship. A friend of mine brought me there to share and speak, and by the name of David Smith. Some of you guys may know him from Sacramento.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I remember the guy that spoke before me quoted Galatians 5 off the top of his head. And I was like, what do I do after that? You know? Like, I have thumb. And so, but I'll interject comedy into what I do, because if I can get you to laugh, I can get your walls to come down.
There you go.
If I can get your walls to come down, I can take a bigger off. No, Jesus will then be able to walk through those walls easier and do what it is that He wants to do.
Yeah. Amen.
And what I believe, I have really just, I'm gonna join you guys.
Yeah, that's all right.
I run a ministry school, and here's what I've learned. When I approach my students and I'm standing above them,
Yeah.
it creates this form of inferiority,
Right.
and it creates this mindset that I'm above them. So I like to level the playing field.
Okay.
Amen.
I just have a much more comfortable chair normally than they do. Because they'll get up, like, we're streaming, we're doing all that, and but I'm usually talking for 3 hours straight.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
And so I hope you guys came ready today.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go for 3 hours. No.
There you go.
I got time. I can run through a few lessons.
More time tonight.
Yes, this is
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So I'll share a little bit about my story, as Brother Kim mentioned here. Is at about the I was actually talking to the gentleman Victor back there. I was sharing a little bit of my story with him. That's why I didn't join you guys for prayer. I didn't know if I was evangelizing or not. So I was trying to figure it out. So when I was a much younger man, in my right outside of graduating high school, I made a pact with my grandmother that if I graduated high school, didn't get arrested, and if you knew my family, it makes sense. If I wasn't, drinking or into drugs and everything like that, she would give me $1,000 when I graduated.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Well, I graduated high school. I was the first person to graduate high school in over 20 years in my entire family.
Oh, wow.
Praise God.
So I had to break a generational curse before I even knew what a generational curse was.
Yeah.
And now I have every family member after me has graduated high school, pursuing college, everything. Because this was one simple task. Well, you think it was simple, but I was very strong-willed and strong-minded, and I don't need a piece of paper to tell me how smart I am. And then I got to challenge the school system. And so,
It didn't work too well.
I had people in high school that would allow me to do that. And so
Good.
right outside of high school, as soon as I got my $1,000, I started investing it the best way a teenager knew how, and I became a drug dealer.
Oh.
And so as soon as I kept my word, I kept my promise with my grandmother. And then right outside of that is when I always looked at Al Capone and wanted to be like him. I wanted to be in crime. I wanted to do organized crime. That was my mindset. That's where I wanted to go.
Okay.
And at around the age of 19 or so, I had got, to give you an idea of how people saw me, is my high school caught on fire. I wasn't attending the school at the time, and people still thought I did it. And so, though I never saw myself that way, I didn't realize I was that much of a troublemaker. I always thought I was doing pretty good. But when I was on this path of being a drug dealer and crime and things of this nature, I had threatened to murder somebody, but it was so real in my heart that it scared me. And I heard a still small voice, Wesley, this isn't who you are. Even then, God was speaking to me before I even knew who He was.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I had given a check to one of my close friends and said, but the check was, I will go to church one time open-minded. So I had no new, actual cash value. So I'm like, you can cash it all you want, but it doesn't mean anything. I mean, other than I'll go to church one time open-minded. And so one time, they invited me to church. And I went with them. It was a half Korean, half English speaking church. Oftentimes much was presented in either Korean or English, and sometimes at the same time. And so sometimes I didn't understand what was being said to me.
Yep.
Through that, God saw an open door. He saw a crack in the door. And He began speaking to me before I even knew who He was. I'd always been a very creative, poetic person. As far as, I'm covered in tattoos, and obviously I'm creative. And, because I've designed all my own tattoos. All mine are my own sketches, drawings, or whatever, and then I'd give them to a tattoo artist and be like, hey, make this look better. Well, I wrote this poem called A Gift. And I love the fact that you read a poem. I'm like, we need more creativity like that in the church. Again. And I wrote this poem called A Gift, and in the beginning, in this poem, I would say that, I've been given a gift that's not stolen, it's not purchased, something that's simply given to you, that you may not be what you wish for at first, but if you remain faithful to it and if you believe in it, you can cause mountains to move. I started quoting scripture in this poem before I was a believer and before I even knew what scriptures were. And I ended it with, if you have love, love will have you. And through that, I essentially prophesied my salvation before it happened. Because it wasn't until 2 weeks later that they said, if you've never received Christ, raise your hand. So I raised my hand. They said, if you want, now say this prayer. So I said the prayer out of respect with no intention of meaning it at all. So I always tell people I got accidentally saved. At a Korean church, and they spoke Konglish, which is the child of Korean and English together.
Yeah.
And when they spoke, if you've never given, they didn't ask me if I wanted to. They asked if I ever had. So I just said the prayer, being respectful. And then my friend comes up to me, you got saved. I was like, I did what with who? Huh? I have no clue what you're talking about. And I just kind of went along with it, whatever, And I just continued to do what I was going to do, which was I was going to go to a party at this point. And going to this party, it was too early to go, so my friend and I, we went, I'm sure you guys remember what a Blockbuster video is. Before Redbox, before Netflix, there was Blockbuster.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to a Blockbuster video. We were going to rent a movie. We were going to walk, hang out at my house before we go to the party. And in the middle of Blockbuster video, something outer-worldly strikes me. I drop to my knees, and all I can tell you is that the old man died away in that very instant.
Wow.
God took this half-heartfelt, not really serious, just out of respect prayer that I said and ran with it.
Man.
And it literally physically hurt for some of that stuff to die.
Yeah.
And because I still had a violent criminal nature about me. and he killed it right there.
Wow.
Amen.
In the middle of a Blockbuster video. My friend just thought I was being weird. I didn't know what was happening. I showed back at my house. My friend from church was waiting for me at my apartment and said, "We need to talk." And I said, "You are right, we do."
Amen.
So I didn't go to the party that night. Within 6 months of that, I was brought into youth leadership, then youth ministry. Then I was within about shortly in that time frame. I was seeking the Lord. I didn't know how. I didn't grow up in church. I grew up in a house that acknowledged God, but didn't practice anything. You know, it says statistics say that most spiritual people practice 3.2 hours of spirituality a week.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's just one charismatic church service.
Right.
You know, and so I didn't grow up with anything like that, and so everything changing inside of me. Holy Spirit began to teach me how to study the Bible at a collegiate level, and I began to look at exegesis and introgesis and the Hebrew, the Greek, and I started studying church history and culture and everything that you would study from a collegiate standpoint at a Bible college. And I started studying at that level, and I just began seeking the Lord. And then one night, as I was, I wasn't doing anything spiritual. You know, it was kind of becomes my MO after a while. Is I wasn't doing anything spiritual. I was actually watching a really dumb kung fu movie. And as I'm watching this movie, and everybody was kung fu fighting, and I see this screen come in front of me, and there I am. I'm surrendered in this vision. I'm open-eyed vision. I see the movie behind it, but I also see what's in front of me.
Amen.
And Jesus appears before me and commissions me, and I knew right then I was called to ministry.
Amen.
That my life would never be the same.
Right.
And then I got brought into, I was a pastor in Rockland for a while. I was a college pastor, a youth pastor. If you could put pastor behind it, I did it. For youth, young adults, college. I did everything but singles pastor and married pastor. And so then I just started at that point, just kind of a little bit more history. That's when I ended up meeting Todd. And in 2007, we did a conference in Rockland. And I decided to, you know what, I need to grow. I need to grow in my gifting. And I started, I was operating at a different prophetic level than the people around me, and I didn't understand a lot of it. And I needed to grow, a fish will grow to the size of its aquarium. And so I decided that I needed to get into a much bigger aquarium because Sacramento and Rockland was not cutting it. I needed to see something bigger.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when I did an internship with Todd and graduated my internship. I got hired on as staff, and we were waiting to see what God was going to do as far as ordaining me and everything like that. I was brought on the road staff, and my first trip was, my internship ended with, Todd, I want to see what you do in Africa and America. And that was in February of 2008. My first paid trip as part of staff was into a place called Lakeland, Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And in April 2nd, I began to see what Todd would do in Africa happen in America.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we, from there, launched in the worldwide revival. For the next 6 months, people would come from all over the place. People would drive by the church, start weeping, come into the church, not know why they're at the church. I'm like, I understand. I know what this is like. And they would give their life to Jesus right there. I'd be there when Presbyterian and whatever other denomination pastors saying, I don't even believe it. Thump. And they would hit the ground because they got slain in the spirit. That was actually my favorite memory of that. Seeing people that, I don't even believe in the gifts. Don't. You don't believe in what?
Say what?
Rethink this.
Right. So here's what all that to say is this. As I was praying about, the Lord gave me the word for you guys before here. I was down in San Luis Obispo ministering the last couple nights, and I had what I was going to be bringing to you guys before I had what I was bringing to them. And I was like,
Praise
so
God.
like all the way down to San Luis Obispo, I was like, Lord, I need you to speak to me about San Luis Obispo, not
Modesto.
Modesto.
Yeah.
They both end in O,
Yeah.
but one's before the other.
I've been there.
And all I could feel the pleasing thoughts of the Lord towards you.
Come on, hallelujah.
It says in Psalms that I know the thoughts that I have towards you, that they are good thoughts and they outnumber the grains of sands. And that word thoughts is the Hebrew word rhea. And the word rhea means thoughts of thoughts of thoughts. So I want you to think about something. If he's the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, his thoughts of you are an infinite loop.
Yeah.
Because he's an infinite loop. He has no beginning, he has no end.
That's right. It's
Right.
everlasting.
And so his thoughts towards you are constantly going, and they're always good.
Amen.
And he said that you're created for his good pleasure.
Amen.
Amen.
So when he looked into the earth and said it is good, he was incapable of saying it is good without you in mind.
Yeah, right.
So when he says it is good, you were in mind. Brother Kim, you were in mind.
Praise God. Thank you.
You were in mind when he said it is good.
Yeah.
Amen.
And so he began to speak to me about, he said, tell my children, because, you know, even though some of you may be older than me, like just like a few of you, just like maybe Brother Kim, you know,
Just one or two.
Yeah.
all the ladies, you know, you're about 24, 28.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah, that's close enough.
Thank you, thank you.
Absolutely, you can have it in writing.
In spirit, there's no age.
Right.
It's written.
Mama didn't raise no fool. But he said, tell my children this. Do not grow weary in doing good.
Amen. Amen.
That what you're doing, and you may not see the direct fruit from what you're doing, but what you're doing is far more fruitful than you'll ever imagine. That you can never judge a field by what you see on the surface, because what's going beneath the surface, or what's taking place beneath the surface, is a whole lot of activity that you may not see right away.
That's right.
That's right.
And then what you're doing is you're providing ground for young people and for older people and different people to cut their teeth and begin to actually step out into their giftings and what God's calling them to do.
Yeah.
Amen.
But then there's the other aspect of what many of you do, which is, you know, assumptively that many that are a part of the Businessmen's Fellowship, you're obviously able to be here on a Thursday in the middle of the day because there's something about you very entrepreneurial. And therefore you actually have the ability to create jobs and income for other people. And though you may not directly see the gratitude that they have, but I guarantee you, even if it's just pulling a TV dinner out of a microwave, they're grateful for it.
Amen.
So don't grow weary in what you're doing.
Amen.
But also do not try to live in somebody else's lane at the same time.
All right.
Amen.
The truest form of worship you're going to see in your life is you living the greatest expression of who you are.
Come on. Good
I'm
word.
somewhere between prophet and life coach. I bounce between the two. I'm actually a certified life coach at the same time. And so like one of the greatest struggles I see in ministry is insecurity.
Sure.
I tell our students all the time,
For sure.
you know, and when I say students, I have students that could be your guys' age, I have students that could be younger than me, and students that can be double older than me.
Oh, yeah.
And that usually presents its own group of challenges.
Sure.
Because they look at me and go, what's this young whippersnapper going to tell me?
It's all right.
And I go, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell
There's
you.
an eternal spirit in you.
And don't look at somebody else's life, somebody else's calling,
Come on.
and get displeased with what you have.
No, no,
Yeah.
no.
Jesus, from the sperma of God, the seed of God,
Yeah.
took 30 years to grow in maturation in the favor of God, in the favor of man,
Right.
for a 3-year ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
Who are we to get, God, I've been doing this for 20.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like that's right.
God, imagine John the Baptist's life.
Come on. Short.
All that time to prepare for just a short little
Yeah.
frame of time.
Yeah.
But what you're doing sometimes is you're pioneering the way, you're pioneering the road for other people to come in right behind your footsteps, and you're digging the trench so somebody like me, or maybe your own sons, or maybe your own daughters, which I can feel the pressure in this room for the concern for sons and daughters.
Wow. Yeah.
I can feel it right now that there's a number of people in here that you're very concerned about your sons and your daughters. There's even just like, even when I said that, there was a cry in somebody's heart about their grandchildren. Who was
Yeah,
that?
it was me. Yeah, for sure.
And I just want to speaking about your grandchildren, just like your own field,
Yeah.
and looking at the harvest, do not look at what's going on the surface.
No.
That what is going on beneath the surface, God is dealing with.
Amen. That's good word.
I'm wavering at this point.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Let him breathe on your sons and daughters. What's that mean by let him breathe? It means you back away.
Yeah.
As being a youth pastor for a number of years, I've seen the effects of you're very loving, but let God be God.
Amen.
And that's the hardest thing. I don't have any kids, so I can say this with ease. That's the hardest thing for a parent.
Mhm. Yeah.
But a promise that the Lord has made me is that He will move on prodigal sons and daughters. And that the movement that will happen on the prodigals will become where there's the promise of a 1 billion soul harvest, but right now we're harvesting the harvesters. The harvesters are the prodigals.
Right.
Yeah.
The harvesters are the very sons and daughters you're concerned about.
Come on.
The very people that you're worried about, that you're saying, God, you need to reach them. I'm praying for them. You're like, pulling on your tunics and pulling out your hair and throwing ash on your face. But you got let God be God. You got to remember the work's been done. He's already. 2 Corinthians 5 tells us that He's already reconciled the whole earth back to Himself. It's a matter of acknowledgement. It's a matter of coming into identity. And much of the church is not. Can I speak into something real quick? Much of the church, like everyone wants to. Oh, there's judgment in California and so on and so. Don't start a fight with me. I'm like, I'm from California. Like, don't speak about my state.
Come on.
Like, it's easy for you to stand on the outside and say that it's judgment. But unless you're willing to get on the inside of this,
Come on.
let me talk to you about what it really is. It's a fire. I spent my whole life, I actually just did a Facebook broadcast before I came in here. I spent my entire childhood with Smokey the Bear telling me only I could prevent forest fires.
That's right.
And what had happened? It was a forest fire that got out of control. Like California has fires and they rather care about the dolphins than take the water from the ocean and put it on the fire. That's California.
Yeah.
California's on a fault line. They're going to have earthquakes. The error in the teaching of our prophetic understanding is that we're interpreting something that's already happening versus prophesying what will happen.
Come on.
And many people are calling themselves prophets and they're interpreting an event that's already occurring and then trying to attribute it to God. But the way judgment occurred in the Old Testament was that the message and the opportunity for repentance and reconciliation would come, and then if they did not repent, then this would happen. Not, this is happening, now you need to repent. The earth is groaning.
Oh, yeah.
It's longing for the sons and daughters of God to arise. But the problem is we're so busy trying to figure out if we're preterist or partial preterist or no preterist, and some people are now Googling what is preterism, and and do we believe in post-trib, pre-trib? If we threw out our end-time concerns and started actually just doing the work of ministry, we wouldn't have these problems. We're so concerned about whether we're going to be post-trib, pre-trib, is there going to be a rapture, is there not going to be a rapture, who's going to play Kirk Cameron in the real life story, but I'm just saying, if we would just go out like brothers over here talking about, pray for 75 people a day, if we would go preach the gospel. I like what Francis of Assisi said, preach Christ at all times, use words when necessary.
Yeah.
Want to know who's preaching a better gospel than the church right now in California? Toyota. You knew where I was going with
I know
this.
where you're going.
There was a nurse risked their own life after I believe they already lost everything, drove their Toyota Tundra into the fires to go rescue and help people, and Toyota saw it on Instagram.
Yeah, they do.
This is Toyota looking out right now.
Right.
What are we doing? Toyota found it on Instagram and said, "Don't worry about your truck. We're sending you a new one."
Yeah, they did.
Like, that thing is going viral right now.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to respond. Great darkness is covering the earth
That was good.
and the people. Literally, it's smoke.
Smoke.
Did any of you see my word that went out on Elijah list about California? You saw it? And how what the Lord showed me that there was going to be a veil that would come from heaven to earth, and then it would block from people being able to see into California. Have you seen an aerial view of that smoke? Looks like it's from heaven to earth, and people cannot see
They
in.
can't see.
However, what the Lord showed me was that He was hiding California because California was about to go through some changes, as far as the government's concerned, and the government's already working on stopping Christianity in California and preventing evangelism. They're trying to go the way of China and trying to go the way of Russia. And the Lord said that as California goes through those changes, and I believe that the government will pursue and go that avenue, but the church will have to rise up. And He said it's going to be the small groups, home groups, house groups, groups like you guys that are going to become the light in the place of refuge for the church. Because here's the thing, church buildings in China are ran by the government right now. And so they're only allowed to preach what the government allows them to preach. But in this environment, in this establishment, this is why the Lord spoke to me and said, when you do start your actual ministry, don't become a nonprofit, because when you're a nonprofit, you're subjected to more government control.
Yeah.
If I'm operating as a business and a corporation, I have way more freedom and way more rights in what I do with my money and how it's done. I have to pay more taxes on it, but I have more liberty in it. I'm a business person too.
Amen.
And so I couldn't have been a drug dealer without understanding, supply and demand.
Right.
So in the midst of this darkness, we become light. Arise and shine, for your light has done. As great darkness covers the earth and covers the people, so will you arise, and your light will come, and your healing will come. Many of you are looking for the restoration and the alignment of things in your own life. Many people, how many feel like just right now you've been kind of stuck? You're just like, I'm trying to go forward. I'm trying to have some forward progression in my life. And He said, it's not because you've done anything wrong. Many people feel like they've done something wrong. But it's not because you've done anything wrong. It's because you're being positioned by God for such a time as this. That you're being divinely positioned. And the Lord called it the cataclysmic collision of Kairos and Chronos time. Those are a lot of big words to basically say He's lining you up for a beautiful collision with destiny.
Amen.
And that's what many people are actually experiencing right now, is you're going to feel, and it's not as suddenly, you're not missing out on anything. That's something I want to affirm people, is you are not missing out on anything at all in what God is doing. And so please do not have any fear about that. But what's going to happen is this chronos and this kairos time. Chronos is the way God measures, or way we measure time. And that's why they call it a chronograph. And then we have kairos time, which is divine time, which is God's time. Not kairos like in Egypt, but kairos in God's time. And it's going to collide together. And when they collide together is when destiny takes forth. Put your hand on your chest. How many of you feel your heart beating right now? Feel that? That's purpose.
Yeah.
As long as that thing still beats, you still have purpose, you still have destiny, you still have a calling on your life. Do not think for 1 minute you're done, you're washed up, you've been looked over, you've been passed up, you've been passed over, you've been forgotten, and none of that, because that's not true. That's a lie from the enemy, and that creates apathy, and then apathy creates depression, and then depression creates, then that's bad news for everybody.
Yes.
That becomes polluted water. As long as you constantly are like this guy back here, I love you, man. I recorded your song that you did, and I sent it to a buddy of mine, a worship leader. His name's Rick Pino.
Yeah.
And I said, you need to hear this guy.
Yeah.
I wonder actually if he responded yet.
Take a look.
He did. Let's see what Rick had to say. I was like, remind me of Clint Black.
Yeah.
They love the harmonica. They love the harmonica too. And I think right now in this moment, the church has the ability to become monumental and
Yes.
epic.
Yes.
But we need a disproportionate perspective. We need our change, our eyes to change on how we view the goodness of God. You know that double-mindedness came to the body, or came to the people of God in the garden. When we knew the knowledge of good and evil, the moment we had the understanding of evil, and let me put it into this perspective now. The moment that we understood or had any understanding of the repercussion for sin, we became double-minded.
Yes,
Yeah,
we did.
exactly.
So we need a disproportionate, in other words, exaggerated view of the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen.
Because if it's the same God yesterday, tomorrow, and forever,
Yep, it is.
Isaiah 43:25 says that I blot out your transgressions so that for my benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's under what Jeremiah called an obsolete covenant.
Right.
And so he's even under an obsolete covenant in which he says the days are coming that I'm going to do away with that covenant and I'm going to create a new covenant, and you will be my people and I will be your God, and I will write my statutes upon your heart. He
Yep.
quotes that in Hebrews,
Yes.
and he does away with it. He calls it obsolete. And so he does away with that, an obsolete covenant. But under that obsolete covenant, he says, I'm going to blot out your transgressions.
Wow.
Then Psalms tells us that he doesn't deal with us according to how we deserve.
For sure. It's a good
It
thing.
says that he remembers our frame. He remembers how we were created. He remembers that we're fragile and made of dust.
Yeah.
Some of us might be more dust than others. That's okay. And some of us just might be dustier. But God is wanting to breathe and move upon your life in this hour, in this moment.